Hey everybody, welcome in. We're back, another edition of the weekly NBA show here on Clubhouse TV presented by sportsbet.io. I've got my guy Chris Farley, professional bettor, with me at Farley Bets. You find all of his great work at sportmoney.com. I'm Ben Wilson, and Chris, I feel like with the way this NBA season has gone, doing a show once a week, like I can't even remember the best bets we gave out last week. We did go 1-0. I had to make sure I wrote it down, though. Wolves, Bulls over 225. That might as well have been like 8 years ago, the way this season has gone out. Doesn't it just feel that way? All the chaos. Victor Wembanyama putting up 50-point games. Guys injured all over the place. Giannis going off for 59. It's been a pretty wild ride here recently in the NBA, and that's kind of bearing the lead here, which is that Steph Curry is getting these MVP tickets from bettors left and right. He's now down to like 35-1. He was triple digits a couple weeks ago. Been a pretty crazy time here in the association. How has all the betting been on your end?
Yeah, I'll just comment on Steph Curry quickly first. I love that. I'm just a huge Steph Curry fan. How he's handled himself throughout his career. Like even when Kevin Durant came over there, he kind of took a step back. Like he knew that Kevin wanted to be the number one guy. He gave that to him. But now Steph is the number one guy. That's for certain, right? And this is like his team to be more of a leader than ever, I think. So I agree with some of those moves going down in that direction. But yeah, to your point, Ben, last weekend I found myself even being in the situation of realizing that I had made some really good look ahead projections on this show, and one or two of those projections I overlooked and didn't take advantage of great points that I made on this show because the weekend came. It was an overwhelming week for me. The NFL is usually my focus on the weekend, so I didn't capitalize on some of the I think if we were to go by my leans, I was like 3-1 or 4-1 or something like that. So maybe a little more official picks on this NBA show today. I have quite a few for the Friday slate.
Let's go.
But yeah, this one, like we said before the show, Ben, this one sets up really well for us because no back-to-backs in these Friday games for these teams. We actually get a nice picture for our audience of what these games should look like.
You got to listen to yourself, Chris. You're giving out all the info. Now you got to back it up with a wager to
I got to watch
made.
this go back, yeah.
Of course, you have to, or at least remember what you said. The beauty of what we're doing now, so we're recording here on a Thursday, but the reason why we have such a clean slate, and this is always just a once a week snapshot in time. So our best bet records, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because we're also betting on our own throughout the rest of the week, and Chris posts all of his content as well on his Twitter page. But 7-4 for us on best bets on the games we've given out this year. What's nice, though, is we have the NBA Cup, which just started on Tuesday. It's this second year now, second iteration, Chris, of this sort of unique idea where the NBA is trying to promote more competitive games early in the season, gives these teams, especially teams who might not be contenders for a title, motivation to play hard and have a goal to play towards. It is one of these things, if you're unfamiliar with the NBA Cup, we have 6 different little pods of 5 teams. You get the 6 group winners plus 2 wildcard teams that make an 8-team knockout round. The final 4 make it to Las Vegas, where they have the semifinals and then the final game. As from a betting perspective, there's a couple small things you could potentially look at motivation-wise. Is there anything, though, you actually do different when you're handicapping these games, Chris? Because at the end of the day, they still count toward the regular season standings. And it's probably hard to make a leap to say you should really view these NBA Cup games in like a different ballpark than your standard, game 28 in an NBA season.
Yeah, I think that would be a stretch, but I do think that it's not something that I quantify, but I do look at the NBA Cup or the tournament games in season as something where you can count on the team showing up a little more, in an NBA spectrum right now, like in an environment where things are so uncertain from game to game, not even talking about injury, right? And Lord knows the NBA is riddled with injuries now in a lot of these teams already, really impactful injuries. Just ask teams like the Phoenix Suns or the Pelicans. But the motivation can wane, right? Like in the regular season, you don't have teams showing up the same way to every single game. At least in the NBA Cup, you can for the most part count on some of these lower to mid-tier teams. That's where you see the effort, right? And you saw it on Tuesday. I mean, the Atlanta Hawks with their B squad, no Trae Young, they beat the Celtics. Like I looked at my phone, like at like 8:30, and then I looked at it at like 9:30, and I couldn't believe what I saw. I mean, I don't know how the Hawks came back in the Celtics, but that happened. So you get a little more of that variety, but also what's the word I'm looking for? The like equity of the NBA, right? Parity. I mean, that comes out a little more in the NBA Cup and in the NBA tournament, and I think even more so because it's new, right? Like this is something that teams are like able to use as motivational tools early in the season when it's been pretty drab early in the season and pretty volatile for the most part. I mean, that's why my bets aren't a ton in these early months, because these teams are still figuring themselves out. But
Sure.
Teams have to storm, form, and norm a little earlier when the tournament comes along.
You have Hawks money line the other night?
I did not have Hawks money line.
I did not either.
Yeah, in fact, I had positions on Boston early in that one, which that hit. I think it was like first half over, something like that. But then I don't know what happened in the second half. But that's where you sit back and you say these are still NBA. These are professional players, right? In NBA teams in any given day, and when there's a reason for extra motivation, it's something to consider.
And it's manifested in the fact that, at least from Tuesday, and granted, very small sample size, but we had 3 games with lines closing of over 9 points. The underdogs in those games, not only did they cover 2 of the 3, but the 2 that covered won outright. You're talking really, really big payouts. Portland, a big upset over the struggling Minnesota Timberwolves. We will need to diagnose what's going on with the 6-6 Wolves. And then, as you mentioned, Chris, Atlanta here. And I think that's probably going to be, at least I know for me, it's a part of some of my best bets here for the Friday card as well, where you do have teams that I tend to try to look at either the underdog is getting undervalued in the market, or you have teams that are in positions where, they're in, they're certainly in bet on spots where maybe if it was game 40 of the season, you would say, okay, this is sort of a low. I wouldn't really want to touch them with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, 100%. And that is usually when my perspective on the NBA shifts a little bit, right around that All-Star break. They come out of the All-Star break, even out of the All-Star break, things are a little weird. But then you can at least, unbelievably, halfway through the season is when you could start to, I think, rely on many of these the better NBA teams as being consistent, because we're certainly not seeing it right now. Like a team like the Timberwolves, I think they're going to be just fine, but there's a lot of question marks there, right? Maybe they're missing Karl Anthony Towns more than they thought, especially from an offensive standpoint. Anthony Edwards kind of having to take a bigger role. So, and Lord knows, Ben, we've talked about your Bucks plenty. They got some things to figure out still too. A few wins, a few big Giannis performances recently, but still some head scratching situations going on over there. So again, we said it on this show before. We're just trying to remind you of that too, because as much as this is a betting show where we give out picks, we don't want to give you information or sound too bold about some of our projections this early in the season.
100%. And I think with that, we can transition into some of our best bets for Friday. We've got a couple of really good marquee games. We certainly want to touch on those as well. You could make a case. So you have 12 games. It's a loaded card. I would say Lakers, Spurs, Suns, Thunder are the 2 big ones here on this Friday. And it's at least for Lakers, Spurs, Chris, easy stay away for me, simply because you've got 2 teams who are kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, where they each do one thing really well. And that one thing they do really well is somewhat mitigated by their opponent's one thing that they have a strength for on the other side. Lakers top 5 offense by overall rating, Spurs a top 12 defense, both right around league average when you factor in the Lakers struggling on the defensive end. Spurs have been hit or miss on offense. I just don't know how you expect Victor Wembanyama, what he looks like bouncing back after his first 50-point game of his career, after he hits 8 threes. Against a Lakers team here that certainly will have motivation, the veterans wanting to lay a smackdown. Lakers short road favorites of 2, but at the same time, LA's been awesome at home, 6-0, but 1-4 on the road, and it's a great game. Classic, as you oftentimes say, Chris, a classic sit back and watch game where you will learn a lot about these 2 teams and how they match up specifically.
Yeah, we've said it before. I think Ben and I think this is like our 4th show together, maybe 4th or 5th. And our brains are syncing up, Ben. I don't know what's going on here. It's good. It's good team chemistry. Maybe we're the modern Cleveland Cavaliers of NBA podcasts. I don't know.
We're going to go 82-0. I love it. I can't wait.
Yeah. But I love that you said this is an easy game to skip, because when you brought this up before the show, I thought you had a very strong position on it, and that's why you brought it up. And I was going to have to assertively disagree with you on that, only because of a few of the things that you brought up, right? First of all, yeah, Lakers have been very good at home, not so much on the road. Spurs have been good at home. This is in San Antonio. Both teams have road back-to-back, like travel spots back-to-back on Saturday. Okay, so, not that this is, it's hard to know which game they're going to emphasize or care more about more. Maybe they perform well in both games. But both teams have to travel the next day on Saturday. Going into the weekend, that could just be a little iffy. I like to stay away from games typically where that's the case. And on top of it, right, the most important part, the spread itself. At first, when I look at this game, I say this is obvious value on the Lakers. I mean, the Lakers are still probably the better overall team. They got the veteran star power. Anthony Davis is back. He looked pretty good. LeBron James, by the way, which I can't help but mention. I've been mentioning for, I guess I haven't been on shows for 20 years, Ben, but if I was, I've been mentioning him for 20 years because 24, 8, and 9 is what this guy is averaging. He's about to turn 40 on December 30th. So it's just things are, I don't know how LeBron is doing what he's doing, but
Ho-hum for LeBron.
Yeah, but so immediately I want to bet on the Lakers, but you look at what the Spurs and who they are lately, right? A little bit of a sophomore slump maybe at the start for Victor Wembanyama, but not so much anymore. I mean, coming off a 50-point game, this is a team as a team now that's a top 10 net rated team the last week, top 10 on defense, top 11 on offense. A lot of that is Victor, obviously, but as he continues to find his comfort zone in his second season, that's a team that I don't want to fade either. So, and of course they have the rim protection, right? They have the front court defense now with him there. And a lot of guys, when you have a star like that, and it's part of the psychology of the NBA, when you have a real true star that's and his stock is rising, it makes everybody else better on the team, right? Because they don't have to do as much. They trust that star. And things are just kind of forming in that chemistry. And he's a good kid. Like we know that, like Victor said, he doesn't like to party, right? Like he doesn't talk trash about other players. A lot of the weird, social media is bothering me type of things that American NBA players care about, Victor does not. So I love that about him. I think he's a great star, and I don't want to fade them right now. So for many, many reasons, Ben, this is a really tough game. Slight lean to the Lakers. I'll probably hate myself for not picking them as an official play because I think they are the better team. But I'm not fading Victor, and I'm not fading the way the Spurs are playing right now.
Sure. It's just how much of a grain of salt do you add when it's okay. Wembanyama was amazing the other night, but he did it against the worst defense in the league in Washington. And before that, Spurs getting the Jazz, the Blazers. 3 of the last 4 defenses they faced have been well below average in defensive rating. Big reason why the Spurs, as you alluded to, Chris, have had really good offensive numbers compared to where they have been at for the bulk of the season so far. 8 threes for Victor, by the way, in that game over Washington. That's Lakers -2 and 229, the total across the market right now. The other marquee game, Suns, Thunder. Are we labeling the Suns as our Suns, Chris, since we've got that win total over? I don't know, but
they're your Suns for sure.
My Suns.
And you're correct about them so far. Yeah.
It's gonna be nice to. I mean, assuming we're on pace to win that bet, the over on the win total for the Suns, but they've won eked out a lot of close, tight games, and admittedly, they're going through a bit of a grinding stretch right now, Chris, where you have no Kevin Durant out with the calf injury. Bradley Beal, he is questionable to play in OKC with this calf injury. He's also dealing with it. I mean, you look at how that manifested in their last game against Sacramento, where Josh Okogie's your leading scorer. I mean, it was ugly all the way around for the Suns. 9-3 yet, just 4-8 against the number, taking on a Thunder team who are favored by 7. 225.5 is the total. I'm just curious how the Thunder will look in another one of these marquee Western Conference matchups where the last 2 games they've faced a team that was a big step up in class that views themselves as a Western Conference contender. They got the better of OKC. Think about the rematch against Denver, losing by 2 at Mile High, and then really getting blown out and outplayed by Golden State at home, losing by 11. So it's another one for me. I didn't have really conviction either way. It's tough to get there with the Suns when you think about no Durant, no Beal potentially, but at the same time, certainly with the 3-point variance the Suns have as a top 4 3-point ratio team, they have enough horses to at least stay within the number here. I just don't want to get out in front of this OKC train necessarily.
Yeah, I actually really like OKC in this spot, and this is going to be one of my official plays for the show. I believe it's showing as 7 at the sports books that have it open by now. Excuse me, I have it at 8, and I could push it to 8.5 really if I was being bolder in my early season power ratings here, which I'm not. I'm pretty humble about them at this point in the season. But the issue for OKC could potentially be in the future. Of course, they're without Chet Holmgren for a little while, which is a significant piece of their front court defense. Obviously, he's a good offensive player as well. But that piece about just a big body in the middle who can play defense and rangy, they're going to miss him. I don't know if they're going to miss him against the Phoenix Suns, though. I mean, this Suns team is designed to play with those big three guys, right? The superstars. And even though Bradley Beal could come back on Friday, this calf injury has been bugging him for a long time. It's one of those things where if you play basketball and you're jumping and your calf is not cooperating, like I don't know if we're going to see him at full strength or even for the full game. And OKC is one of these programs where, like a lot of well-coached teams too, especially coming off of some more challenging games recently, when they go back home, they just do a lot of little things right. Their assist and turnover ratio looks better. The rebounding looks better. Their chemistry as a team and the way they pass the ball looks better. The scoring distribution is wider throughout their roster. More guys are scoring. And their defense, even without Chet Holmgren, has been extremely physical, extremely feisty. And the Suns are going to struggle in that situation. I mean, Devin Booker is a good player. I've criticized him a lot in the past, only because people make that, there was points where people were comparing him to Kobe Bryant. We should not be doing that. But
Not yet,
by himself, or even if he has Bradley Beal, the Suns aren't the biggest team in the NBA. And I don't think OKC is going to be at a disadvantage without Chet as much. This is a nice spot where they're coming off some rest. They're going to stay at home on Sunday against the Mavericks as well. So I like OKC in this one. I think they can get some margin here. The Suns have been fighting really hard and, still winning without Durant, but I think this might be a mountain too tall to climb for a banged up Suns team right now.
Especially when it's an OKC team, fifth best in defending opposing three-point shooting, and you are talking about a Suns team that lives really and dies with the three ball. That could go one of two ways, and if you're talking potentially two of the three main stars out for Phoenix, I totally get where you're coming from there. And look, at least we're well ahead of pace on that win total over, so we can. We're not gonna cry or get up in arms about Phoenix losing a game where they're 7-point dogs on the road to the Western Conference favorite there. But a really good matchup: 9-3 Suns versus 10-2 Thunder. Chris, we're marking it down. Thunder -7, as that's our predominant opening number here for the Suns and Thunder on Friday night. You ready we've talked a lot of West, and that's really been the theme, right? So far, the Western Conference, it's stacked. There's so many good teams.
Yep.
Then you peer over to those Eastern Conference standings, and Cleveland's been awesome, 13-0. Boston going to be the obvious front runner for the title, and the odds still reflect that at 9-3. And then after that, it's just a whole lot of woof. I mean, these teams are just everything that could go wrong. It seems like has for a number of teams, injury-wise, performance-wise. You go from Philly to Orlando, who play against each other on Friday, to Milwaukee, and on and on and on. Yet I weirdly find myself awfully intrigued, Chris, by some of these Eastern Conference games on Friday. You have anything from the Eastern games you have for best bets?
Yeah, I do. I'm gonna take a shot on the Brooklyn Nets.
Let's go. Me too.
Not money line, but I believe this is at Madison Square Garden, Brooklyn against New York, and Brooklyn is a tough team to figure out because if you look at some statistics, like over the last 3 games, no defense is worse than the Brooklyn Nets. But if you watch them play, it doesn't really look like that. They're like, these are not necessarily measurable things, but they're just fighting really hard. They're playing really physically out there on the court. They're just making it more difficult for opposing offenses and opposing defenses. And again, I say on the show a lot, just a lot of B to B plus players. They can beat any team on any night. It feels like kind of like how the Bulls are playing right now. Just a little feisty. Knicks is 10.5 is what I'm seeing, Ben. You can check me on that if you want. But that is a large spread for a Knicks team right now who is struggling to find their identity. And I think a lot of that is because of Karl Anthony Towns, who is he's an interesting piece for any team. I think he would be great with a team like, maybe the Phoenix Suns, like add to that offensive output or something. But Karl Anthony Towns, he's allowing 71% shooting percentage to his defenders or to his opposing player at the rim. Okay. And that is not what the Knicks are used to, right? They're used to a guy like Mitchell Robinson, who's still not there, who's one of the premier rim protectors in the NBA, a guy that they relied upon in a lot of the matchups of the past. Karl Anthony Towns, for as good as he's been offensively, I think he scored, over 40 Tuesday night. He's not providing it on the defensive end. And I think there's just a lack of chemistry, even on offense. Maybe him hogging that ball, we've heard that about Karl Anthony Towns in the past, and kind of taking away from that chemistry. I didn't like that the Villanova crew left New York at all. I think they should have kept that going, Ben. But I just don't love what I'm seeing in a lot of intangible ways from the Knicks right now. And even though the Nets aren't going to the NBA Finals this year, they're fighting really hard. They're playing physically. And this is a huge spread for a Knicks team that, quite frankly, doesn't deserve it right now. So I'm going to play. I'm going to bite my, I'm going to swallow this one, Ben, whatever way you want to put it. It's disgusting, tastes gross, but I'm going to bet on the Nets on Friday night.
You're like my front man. You're kind of budging the door open tepidly, and I am going to walk right through. I love that you went here because I do like the Nets, and they are getting 11 at a couple different books right now. That's the first bet I put in pocket here on these openers. Nets plus 11 over the Knicks, so we will be in tandem here, Chris, on this play. Let's think about market factors and perspectives for a second. Last year, when the Nets were just a dead team, total sellers, they had one of the worst records in the league by the end of the year, and the Knicks were completely surging. They were red hot. They were the talk of the NBA. They were getting bet each and every night. When the two teams met in MSG toward the end of last year, Knicks were a 7.5-point favorite in one of those games, did cover on March 23rd. Knicks were 11.5-point favorites the final week of the season when the Nets had just completely given up. Now we're sitting here at the start of the following season. Nets are probably as good as you're going to get out of where they are at from a team potential right now. They are playing well above their expectations, 5-7 as a team. They had the lowest win total of anybody. They'll be the first team to go over as a 19.5 win total. Knicks clearly a work in progress, bottom 10 in defensive rating, and yet where's the market? It's still at Knicks minus 11. It's way too aggressive that the market is still this bullish on New York when there are still so many things Tom Thibodeau has yet to get integrated with. A Karl Anthony Towns, who's a huge downgrade on defense. Advanced stats, you don't need to look at those for you to understand that a Towns defensive match is just not the same as what New York has had in the past when you have Mitchell Robinson healthy at center, who's still out rehabbing from his injury. Great number play as a result here on a Nets team, who I do like how they have gotten away from being super one-dimensional. They've forced Cam Thomas to distribute the ball a little bit more. You look at how the season started. Thomas was just jacking up shots left and right. He was averaging 27.5 points per game, but needed about 20 shots a game to do so. You look at the November numbers, he's only averaging 21 a contest, but he's reduced his shot volume by about 3.5 shots per game, and his efficiency has gone way up. He's shooting almost 40% from three. And with Dennis Schroeder, Cam Johnson, both averaging well over 16 a game, this has actually been a really nicely balanced Nets team who plays really slow. They've leaned into that identity. They want to slow it down, put this into the half court, and get quality shots from three, which they're doing. Top 10 volume team, both in makes and attempts from three-point range. With that all being said, the 11 is a really good number. Would not stun me whatsoever for this to be a super tight game going into the final minutes, Chris.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you said. They're 9-3 against the spread, too, are the Nets this season so far, one of the better covering teams in the NBA. And, if this came out as an 8, even a 9, maybe I'm staying away from it, Ben. But, to our audience out there, and I know you hear seasoned bettors saying this a lot, and it must be annoying because you just want to hear about the NBA and the players and everything that happens. But at the end of the day, it really is about that number, right? And if we're getting over a 10, the Nets could be down by 15 with 2 minutes left, some garbage time, and they cover that number. I mean, the Knicks are going to have to sustain a significant lead for the entirety of this contest, most likely to cover a number like this. So the Nets are not playing the kind of basketball where they're going to easily permit that. And I love what you said about their half-court game and Cam Thomas. The guy needs to distribute more. He's finally doing that, and the team is benefiting from it. And you could argue that they have more chemistry than the New York Knicks right now.
I went into the show, Chris, expecting that I was going to have to put a hard sell job on and
Talk
hate
Nets.
myself for betting the Nets. And now here we are. I'm like, this is like the most fired up I've been about a best bet we've given out all season. Nets plus 11.
That's because we're not talking
over
about the
the Knicks.
Bucks too. That helps, right?
Yeah, thank the Lord. We could avoid that. Speaking though of the Bucks, you did have. I mean, this was one again. Check out Chris's the free plays he's given out over at Farley Bets. This had to have been like your just throw the prayer hands up to the sky for that win you had the other night. Bucks, I think you were laying 6 right against the Pistons. Ron Holland, my guy who I got to work with at the G League Ignite, great young kid. I like him. I think he's going to have a really good career once he kind of gets more consistent from a jump shooting perspective. But tie game, gets fouled with 1 second to go, clanks back-to-back free throws to send the game to overtime. And if you had the +6, Chris, with Detroit, it's the second that happened, you're like, I'm dead. There's no way we're covering. What happens? Bucks end up winning by 7 in overtime. So a nice winner for you on that. But I bring all that up because have you seen the stretch the Pistons have been on? I mean, the last 5 games, 2 overtime games, they had a 2-point loss at home against Houston, 1-point win against Atlanta, 1-point loss at Charlotte, overtime win by 2 over Miami, and then the game we just mentioned. That is a really tough stretch for a young team like Detroit, who has been banged up. Jaden Ivey, Tim Hardaway, both been day-to-day with small injuries. And situationally now, off the come down there, I love going against Detroit now here on this Friday night where they are in Toronto taking on the 2-10 Raptors. And you're asking yourself, why is Toronto laying 2.5 at home when they've been the worst team by record in the NBA? The market is telling you something here, Chris, and I love the situational angle more than anything for Toronto. I laid a short 2.5 with them over Detroit.
Yeah, I'm not touching that game, but I lean your direction, and I totally agree. I will say, JB Bickerstaff, right? He's making change, right? I mean, and that's what you're seeing for Cleveland too in their situation. A new coach can sometimes just bring a new energy, and I think players today need a coach that can talk to them. That's not going to yell at them, that sort of thing. And it's working there in Detroit. They're busting their balls every game. That said, tough spot. It's always a tough spot to go to Toronto. But the Raptors are also quietly playing a little better too. They've gotten healthier. They still don't have Scotty Barnes, but they've gotten healthier. And I can't disagree with that. 2 teams in general that I'm probably not going to look to bet on very often. But it's a toilet bowl there. If I could just offer something really quickly from Friday night, I am looking at the Wizards and the Hawks over over 235. At this point, that's going to sound very square to the audience probably, but everything is just there for those 2 teams. I mean, the Wizards haven't been scoring very much, but in the last game they got up to 230. Of course, they allowed a ton of points to the Spurs, but there's not going to be a lot of defense in this game, guys. No defense, very high paces for both teams. Washington, Atlanta. At Atlanta, they scored 240 and 253 in 2 previous games. Just the recipe is there. That's all. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be regression, and for some reason we see some crazy 205-point game. But when the ingredients of pace and no defense are there, and both teams are showing better things on offense, like if you don't know all the players who are out there on the court for the Hawks, I understand, but they're actually playing pretty well together, especially on offense. So I think the Wizards kind of rediscovered a little bit the other night, and I like the over. I like that one to go into the 240s again, Ben. We're going to start to see offenses at least operate at a higher level now as we get deeper into November, and the Hawks might have found something too in some of these second, third string players.
They've been really impressive recently. It's not just the one-off as a 16-point dog winning outright over Boston. I'm with you. Sometimes these bets, you don't need to overthink. And Washington, worst defensive team in the league, an Atlanta team that has been playing at a faster tempo and pace, and now their second and third string guys playing with more confidence would only be over for me there as well. So look at us giving out. Oh, we got 4 or 5 best bets here, hot off the presses. Anything else you've got before we wrap up, Chris? Because I think we've got a nice little portfolio here for the NBA Cup and the crazy, weird, kind of mind-boggling courts that you'll have to get used to when you watch these games on Friday.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'll try to do this every show. Just look ahead to future dates. I'm going to bring up the most future date yet before we have another show. Tuesday, Boston hosts Cleveland. That should be a fantastic game. I think Cleveland will be undefeated as they head over there. Just want to mention Boston has only 3 games or 2 games, excuse me, leading up to that game within a week. So Boston played Wednesday. I believe they play Saturday, and then they're going to play Tuesday. That's not a lot of work for Boston. They have a lot of time to prep and to rest before they host Cleveland. So, that's a spot. If there's one area of regression that I anticipated from Cleveland, it's in their 3-point shooting. We've already started to see that a little bit, and we know how lethal Boston can be from beyond the arc. If Boston catches an early lead, if they seem like they're in rhythm, maybe it's a game to bet live. Like if Boston looks good, these are still the champs. They're still absolutely stacked. Cleveland has played wonderfully, but I think that's a game to look at Boston and Boston only. I'm not going to even try to look at Cleveland there unless the spread was absurd, but it's not going to be absurd because they're undefeated. And then quickly Saturday, Dallas is hosting San Antonio. It's Thursday as we record this. If Dallas lays an egg at Utah on Thursday, or if San Antonio looks really good Friday against the Lakers, I would look to go the other direction, right? So if San Antonio looks good Friday and Dallas doesn't look good Thursday, that's a great spot for Dallas on Saturday. So just look at competing things there on Saturday for those 2 teams. And then finally, Sacramento hosts Utah on Saturday after facing Minnesota on Friday. That's a pretty supreme letdown spot for the Kings. They stay at home, but they've been playing poorly against bad teams, playing better against better teams. So kind of weird to figure out there in Sacramento, but that qualifies as a major letdown spot on a back-to-back against the Jazz, assuming that they play well on Friday night.
It doesn't always play out the way we're laying this out, but that's the whole reason we do the exercise, because on the occasions, and it worked perfectly for you last week, Chris, when it actually does lay out in the way we are potentially looking for value, it's a really good opportunity then to jump out and at least have that mind as a bettor, because as weekends, there's a lot going on. I mean, it's even though I know we're on an international break across the pond for our guy Will Pattison, I know he's trying to figure out what to do with himself, our producer here. Over there in the UK, but there's a lot to try and sift through. Whether now we have college basketball that has started, NBA, NHL, NFL, college football, all that good stuff. So for us, we have 4 best bets, 1 joint one, Nets plus 11 over the Knicks. Chris, you and I, we are dangerously all in on this Brooklyn Nets.
That's
team.
Our joint play. That's scary.
Yes,
okay.
It is. Joint play for us. I'm on Raptors minus 2.5 over the Pistons. Toronto's found something with Grady Dick, by the way. Leads all second-year players in the NBA, 20 points a game. And then Chris going Thunder minus the 7 over the Phoenix Suns, as well as a total Wizards Hawks over 235. NBA Cup, we've seen one iteration of it so far, and there's been some really, really good games. I'm pumped to see how that all plays out, Chris, and excited to be back with you next week. We'll be back to do it all over again and see how it plays out. So for Chris at Farley Bets, I'm Ben Wilson at Ben_Wilson_1. We will see you next time. Best of luck with all your bets as the NBA season rolls on here from Clubhouse TV and sportsbet.io.